So I did a show about a week and a half ago about the end times because people are talking a lot about the end times and they're curious, are the things we're seeing now any kind of a sign of the end times? The one I did a couple weeks ago was pertaining to the prophecy of pestilence, meaning that there's going to be an outbreak of disease around the world. And I talked about the coronavirus. At the time I did that broadcast, about 2,700 people had died. And I said that the virus didn't really qualify as a fulfillment of prophecy, but we'd have to keep watching it, is what I said. Well, in addition, I also said that other prophetic pieces of fulfillment were missing. And so it made me reluctant to claim that the coronavirus was part of the end times. But as of today, I looked on the internet this morning, 6,600 people around the world have died. So I'd be rash to claim that a global pandemic doesn't qualify as the end times prophecy. So it could be. But we're watching for other pieces of what the Bible prophesies, because it's not just one thing, it's a whole picture it's a whole network of fulfillments. So obviously another thing that we're seeing right now is the very real possibility of a global economic meltdown. And that is prophesied as well. So besides the global pandemic that we are seeing right now, that is one of the possible signs of the end times, we're seeing this economic meltdown. Let's see, that leads me to Revelation 6, verses 5 and 6. Let me read those to you. When the Lamb opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and there before me was a black horse. Its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. Then I heard what sounded like a voice among the four living creatures saying, 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages, and 6 pounds of barley for a day's wages, and do not damage the oil and the wine." Unquote. Now you've probably heard about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. This is the third one, the black horse. Economic meltdown. I mean, we're watching in real time what's happening to the stock market. It's just collapsing 2,000 points a day virtually for the last week and a half. We're seeing the rush that's going on in stores, emptying shelves of staples and of products. And so Revelation 6:5 has this image of scales in it, of a balance. In Revelation 6:5 speaks about scarcity. It talks about rationing and hunger as preliminary signs of things to come in the end times. Now, when it talks about wheat and barley, these were staple foods of the day, pretty much as bread is still a staple in our day. It's telling us that the situation gets to a point where it costs a day's wage to buy a day's worth of food. So I looked that up. Now, according to the Department of Labor, looking at last quarter of 2019, the median income for a full-time salary or wage worker on a weekly basis was $936. So this is what the verse is talking about. If we were to talk in real dollars in our era, the situation is going to come to a point where it costs about $1,000 to buy a week's worth of groceries. That's a lot of money. And it's usually on the basis of supply and demand. But that's not all. The text also mentions barley. Now we have to understand that barley in those days was a poor man's wheat. It was less expensive, and it was often fed to animals instead of humans. But this verse is telling us that people are so desperate for wheat, and wheat is in such short supply that they start buying animal food to eat, but that still costs them a week's worth of wages. So they were going to pay $1,000 for a week's worth of pet food, right? So it's telling us you can't even buy quality food with your $1,000. You're buying a week's worth of groceries, but you're buying substandard quality goods because that's all that's available. And there are shortages and rationing, and things are ridiculously overpriced. But that's not all. The text also says, "And do not damage the oil and the wine." Now, oil and wine were luxury items. Now, the Bible refers to them when it talks about the end times in other prophecies, after the trouble is over, as a product of prosperity, that there will be so much oil and wine, it will be flowing freely through the land. That's in Joel 2:19-24, and it's in Hosea 2:22. But what we're being told here in Revelation is that the rich are still going to be feasting on their sumptuous fare, while the poor are rummaging for low-quality survival staples. Now, we know how this works. The great division, the great divide between the rich and the poor, which grows even more extreme in the end times, and we know that it has been growing more extreme in our times, but the rich are able to pay the businesses to get what they want, and they can pay more for it. So, there's a little bit of a quid pro quo going on there, and the poor have to settle for whatever trickles down, and they have to pay $1,000 for a week's worth of pet food. So, see, famine always hits the poor people the worst. So here's what the text is telling us. There's going to be economic meltdown. There's going to be limited supplies. There's going to be a competition for resources. There's going to be oppressive inflation and gouging prices, and that there's going to be a growing divide between the rich and the poor. So are we on the edge of the end times now? We just have to keep watching now, don't we?